Welcome to the in-depth video on Lotic AIM critical concepts. This video discusses the major concepts within the Lotic AIM protocol that are essential to successfully sampling a reach and how they are related to the protocol. The topics in this video are also covered in Technical Reference 1735-2, Section 2.2, Appendix B, and Appendix D. The critical concepts covered in this video are Bankfull, Bench, and Scour line. It is absolutely critical to correctly identify these three concepts in the field. Bankfull is the height and width on the stream bank at which the stream fills the channel and begins to overflow onto the bench. Bankfull height is determined by the water height that corresponds with channel forming flow, which occurs approximately every 1.5 years. Bankfull is one of the most important concepts to identify correctly at sampling reaches. Reach length and many other measurements are determined by bankfull height and width. Bankfull height and width is measured at all 11 main transects within the reach. When identifying bankfull in the field, there are several characteristics that should be used for correct identification. It is important to note that not all of these characteristics will be present at every stream, and two or more features should always be used to correctly identify bankfull throughout the sampling reach. Bankfull is located at a relatively consistent elevation in stream and river systems, so when arriving at a sample location, it is necessary to walk up and down the stream and look out for all bankfull indicators that occur around the same elevation within the sample area. One of the most obvious indicators of bankfull is a change in stream bank slope. In many cases, such as this one, bankfull is located at the spilling point where water would leave the stream channel and start to flow onto the bench. This is where the slope of the bank goes from very steep to nearly flat. In this case, bench and bankfull will be at the same elevation. In many systems, such as those that are incised or in a V-shaped valley, bankfull is not related to a bench. That's when other indicators should be used to identify it. One of the other bankfull indicators is a change in substrate size. Substrate often becomes finer and less well sorted at and above bankfull. In some streams, bankfull can also be identified by a change in vegetation. This can look very different in each system, but usually presents as either a transition of grassy and herbaceous vegetation to woody vegetation, a transition of wetland shrubs, such as willow and dogwood, to trees, or is the lowest elevation of established cottonwood and alder trees. Point bars or gravel bars that are usually on the inside of a meander in a stream can be an indicator of bankfull. The highest point of these bars can sometimes indicate the lowest possible height of bankfull. Bankfull can also be identified by the staining or scouring of rocks, especially in big river systems. Finally, bankfull will usually be just above the elevation of undercut banks. There are many lines of evidence that can be used to identify bankfull, and in most systems, two or more of these indicators must be used to identify bankfull throughout the reach. The list of indicators can be found in the protocol 1735-2. It is helpful to remember that bankfull elevation is fairly consistent throughout the reach, so when locating it on the stream bank, look up and downstream for more indicators. Let's run through a few examples of identifying bankfull in the field. The bankfull indicators highlighted in each photo are the main indicators that may be used to identify bankfull for each situation. Where is bankfull located on this stream? What indicators can be used to identify bankfull? This is where bankfull is located. A change in slope and vegetation can be used to identify it. How about on this stream? This is where bankfull is located. A change in slope, a change in vegetation type, and the staining of rocks can be used to identify it. How about on this stream? This is where bankfull is located. A change in vegetation type and the elevation of undercut banks can be used to identify it. Where is bankfull on this stream? This is where bankfull is located. A change in slope and vegetation type can be used to identify it. This concludes the module on bankfull. The next critical concept in this tutorial is bench. Active benches are floodplains, which are relatively flat surfaces adjacent to a stream or river that are formed by periodic flooding. In many systems, benches will be located at the same elevation as bankfull. Benches are important because they support riparian ecosystems, provide critical habitat for aquatic-dependent species, and dissipate flow and energy during high-flow events. Bench height is measured at all 11 main transects. Not all benches, however, are located at the same elevation as bankfull. In some systems, a stream has been cutting deeply into the stream bed. This downcutting is called incision, and it can impact where the bench height is measured. Sometimes in streams that are actively incising, stream waters never reach their benches, making these benches inactive, i.e. abandoned floodplains. Bench measurements in these systems can be a lot higher than bankfull height measurements. In some cases, streams will stop incising and begin to heal from the incision event, and as a result, a new active bench occurs at a lower elevation than terraces or abandoned floodplains. The new active bench should be measured in Lotic AIM sampling. Unlike bankfull, benches are not always continuous throughout a reach, and the bench may alternate between left and right banks throughout a system. The first flat depositional feature at or above bankfull is measured, even if this is at a different elevation or side of the stream than the previous location. Bench height can also vary depending on what side of the stream it is on. For the Lotic AIM protocol, the bench height is always measured on the lower bench surface, because the lower bench will be inundated first in a flood event. In some systems, especially those in mountainous regions, streams flow through V-shaped valleys. These systems typically have no potential to support a flat depositional surface above bankfull. In these systems, there is no bench. The bench height is recorded as the same as bankfull height. Can you spot where the bench is on this stream? How about bankfull? On which side of the stream would the bench be measured? This is where the bench is located. It would be measured on the left side. Where is the bench in bankfull on this stream? This is where the bench is located. It would be measured on the left side. Where is the bench and bankfull on this stream? This is where bankfull and bench are located. The bench would be measured on the right side. Scour line occurs below bankfull and above the base flow water level. Identifying scour line correctly is important because it is used to delineate the extent of several measurements that are taken throughout a reach. Scour may be located above, at, or below the current water level. When identifying scour line in the field, first try to evaluate it in a straight section of the stream. Scour is always below bankfull and is relatively consistent throughout the reach. Like the bankfull identification process, there are several indicators that are used to identify scour. Scour is often located on the ceiling of undercut banks and at the lower limit of sod-forming vegetation. It can also be identified by indentations on point bars or by a vertical drop on the bank below bankfull. It is important to use a combination of these indicators because scour can be fairly hard to determine even for a seasoned Lotic AIM technician. This is especially true for those working in desert systems. Can you identify scour line in this system? How about bankfull and the bench? These features are located here. Where is scour, bankfull, and bench for this stream? These features are located here. How about this one? These features are located here. This concludes the in-depth look at the critical concepts used in the Lotic AIM protocol. If you are collecting Lotic AIM data or would like to see more examples of bankfull, bench, and scour, please review the content by completing the practice quiz that accompanies this video.